National Master James Cantor III here with Chess.com, and today we have the top 5 endgames from Jose Raúl Capablanca. Now this first one here is actually against Aaron Nimzowitsch, or Aaron Nimzowitsch versus Capablanca here in 1913. Capablanca is playing with the black pieces, and h5 was the last move here. As we notice, we see two opposite color bishops here, so a lot of times these games can be sort of drawn because you can't actually oppose each other, and all we have to do is kind of shuffle back and forth. One of the key ideas is putting your pawns on the opposite color of the bishop so that it cannot attack them. For instance, this pawn's being weak on c4, so it's actually attacking it in a way and keeping the king kind of tied to this pawn. So after h5, bishop g3 from Aaron Nimzowitsch, and after bishop g3, there's a3, intending to queen, obviously, here. And now after king to b3, you would think something like maybe b5 or even a2 and then take on c4. But Capablanca says, take it now and see if he takes it as a trap here. Bishop takes c4, and if king takes c4, then we have a2, which is very strong. Bishop e1 saying, hey man, you can't do that. You should be losing this game. You would think maybe b5 check, but that actually would lose. You actually have h4, which is way better. So king b3 trying to attack this pawn that's trying to queen. We play g3, and instead of taking on g3, you just push past it. One of these pawns are queening. I don't know which one, but one of them are going to queen. It's your choice, says Capablanca. One of them is going to queen. But that didn't happen. After bishop takes c4, Aaron Nimzowitsch saw that. He plays king takes a3. Gets out of the way. We now play b5 because we're trying to advance, and whoever can make the passed pawn and queen it, that's all about what's happening here in the endgames, is going to win this game. So after b5, there's c3, stopping b4 temporarily here. Very strong move. And after king d5, which is extremely strong, you have to make sure your king is active, place him towards the center or wherever the action is, especially in the endgame. And after king d5, bishop f2, tying the king down to c5. So the king can't move for obvious reasons, so we can capture on c5, giving us better drawing chances. After bishop f5, there's bishop e2. So we can remove this bishop and go to c4 at the same time. Still trying to create this passed pawn and guide it with our king as much as possible. King to b3, stopping king c4, but not for long, hence the move bishop e2, which is really strong. Now we can check bishop d1, and then we get the c4 square. We got exactly what we wanted here, and now we're in gaming for real. And after king c4, there's king c1. If we take on c3, maybe not, takes here, because these pawns are so strong. But bishop takes c5 is an option, maybe even king takes d1. But the best move was bishop f3 here, getting out of the way and rerouting the bishop if possible. And then we have king to d2, very strong move, cutting the king off from the squares, defending this pawn as well. But you let us create our passed pawn, and that's what we wanted. Now white has something else to focus on where we can play on both sides of the board, but white is definitely holding so far, trying to make this draw. After c takes b4, there's bishop h4 here, intending to move bishop f6, cutting off the king from even further access to anything, and also trying to really play for a draw here. After bishop h4, there's bishop e4, just eyeing the queening square, just in case. Nothing yet, but just in case, we're eyeing the queening square. After bishop f6, bishop g6. Sometimes it takes maneuvers, waiting for your opponent to make a mistake. Maybe they're not as accurate in the endgame here. After bishop g6, there's bishop back to h4, as he has really not much else to do, only one pawn versus 3 here, but he's trying to fight for this draw. There's b3 now on the board, just expanding a little bit more, getting closer to a queen. And now bishop f6 is necessary because b2 would be unstoppable. So after bishop f6, now very strong move, h4. Because if you take this, again, like we said, it's unstoppable. We're queening. This is why h4 is allowed. And now we're playing on both sides of the board. And after king e3, there's g3 now. G3 is on the board. And after h takes g3, what would you play? We kind of looked at this before, right? Where you could play h3 or h takes g3. The choice is yours. What do you do in this position? Here it is. Kappa says h3. Yep, h3 is on the board, big fella. Here we go. And after king f2, beautiful move. You have to find this one. You got to find this one because this could still end in a draw if you're not accurate. So something like, oh, move the king up and then try to queen, will run into g4 and he snags the pawn in some cases. So you got to be very careful, or also allowing white to still have a passed pawn. So after king f2, there's bishop f5, stopping any g4 pushing here. Strong prophylactic move, strong endgame move. Absolutely amazing. And after bishop f5, there's g4 anyway. And then after bishop takes king to g3, hoping that this would be a draw. But a lot of times, guys, think about this. The rook pawns, right? The rook pawns are very draw-ish if you have the wrong color bishop. But in this case, we have a light square bishop, which means we can queen and we can queen a rook pawn at that. Now, if this was a dark square bishop somewhere on the dark squares, this would actually be very close to a draw here. Our last chances will be trying to trade this bishop and trying to queen without this bishop sacking on this pawn, because this king is going to take this one. And in the opposite color bishop in game, the king would actually, or in the wrong color bishop in game, if I had a dark square bishop and all I have to do is get to the corner, and I'll be good as long as I get rid of one of these pawns. After king g3, there's king to d3, because you can't take it, because you can't stop the queen. That's mean. Now let's go back here. King to d3, and he's just saying, I'm going to walk in here. He plays king h2. King c2, literally just doing this with his eyes closed. King to g3 and b2. And Aaron Nimzowitsch resigns in this position. There's nothing you can do. After you sacrifice here, again, guys, what did we say? That we have the right color bishop here. So when we get our king close enough over here, we're going to be able to deprive this king of the light square here, the corner square, which he needs to be in. And in some cases, either getting mated immediately, or you're just going to have to run around but until you get mated after us queening, because the bishop's able to do that. And if king takes, of course, you can't stop the queen. So beautiful endgame there, and is showcasing how to play against the opposite color bishop, especially when you guys have extra pawns. So that was number one. And now let's move on to number two. And here we are with endgame number two. William Winter versus Jose Raúl Capablanca in 1919. Now, in this position, there's a lot going on here, a lot of pressure, lots of tension. There's double rooks here on the file here, attacking, especially with things like a takes b5, followed by rook takes a5. Both of the bishops are absolutely gross here, but black actually has a better chance of getting his active than white's does. How do you ever get this bishop active is a great question here. So let's actually see what happens. Capablanca chooses c4 here, very strong move, activating the bishop and breaking up all of this tension that's going on here. Lots of ways you can play. You can take a takes b5, you can do this way, that way. There's so many ways, and you can always go wrong here as well. Now, let's see what happens. Winter chooses a takes b5 here, saying, hey, if you take this way, then I'm going to snap a pawn, probably taking this way, keeping the file closed. And if you take one of these pawns, I can probably take one of these. But lots of tension, lots of tension. Here's what Kappa chooses. He chooses c takes b3, taking the rook if you don't do anything about it. If you take on c6, then we're going to take the rook. That's pretty obvious. And if rook takes a5, we actually end up with a passed pawn. That could be deadly. So in this case, he just says, you know what? Hey, I'm going to take back. We're not going to allow you to get any of that stuff. But then rook takes b5, and we lie. Very strong, defending the a5 pawn, attacking b3. And look at the bishops, guys. Now we're actually playing a piece up, where white's playing a piece down due to the bishop on g3, has no moves here. In fact, if you glance away and just kind of like glance at the board, it looks like black is up a piece, because this looks like a pawn to me. So now after rook takes b5, there's rook to a4, saying please take on b3, because I need some type of activity. And that's exactly what happens. Rook takes b3 on the board, and then he plays d4 for activity instead of rook takes a5, which would end up probably honestly just losing, guys. Look at this. Rook takes, rook takes, and rook takes. We have a passed pawn. This bishop is out of the game. Even if you try to go this way, where do you go? Oh, brick wall. Another one. Yikes. So that didn't happen in the game, though. After rook takes b3, there's d4, trying to create some counterplay. Please take my pawn on d4. Please take my d4 pawn. And then he says, absolutely not. This is going to be terrible for you. Rook to b5 from Capablanca here, defending once again. And then after rook to c4, still trying to create some counterplay. Well, Kappa finds a very strong move and very nice here. Rook to b4, not allowing rook takes a5 anymore. Why? Because the rook's not there anymore to take on a5. So after rook takes c6, and then rook takes d4, and miraculously, Winter resigns right here. Right here, he resigned. Can you believe it? He resigned right here. Now, why would he resign right here? Well, let's take a look. He's down a piece the rest of the game. This bishop is doing nothing. So literally, you could probably just walk this pawn down, move the king around, and finesse. Move the bishop, move the rook over. Everything's going to be very easy, just pushing forward on all levels on the queen side here, because there's nothing you can do because you're down a piece. Bishop g3 is not even a piece. It's not doing anything. So this position was very simple for him to win, and it all started here from just a break right here in the center, guys. It was very nice, or on the wing. So we have this nice little break here. c4 was very strong. c4, a takes b5, c takes b3. And beautiful, beautiful in-game play here, guys. You can always learn something from Capablanca's in-games. Rook a4, rook takes b3. D4, trying for counterplay. He says no counterplay. Try not to give your opponent counterplay, especially in the end games. Rook C4, Rook B4. Takes and resigns. Ouch, because you can't move that third piece. Well, it's really two now because you only have two rooks now. And versus a non-looking piece, a pawn here. So that was number 2, guys. Now let's move on to number 3. And here we are with in-game number 3. We have David Janowski versus Jose Raúl Capablanca in 1916, guys. So last move was rook to a7, pinning the bishop to the king here. Honestly, this position was kind of tough for white anyway, but we find a very nice combo, says Capablanca here, especially in the endgame. Bishop takes g2, rook takes, and now h4 for the score. There we go. Beautiful move. Now we're going to pick up an exchange here. But just because we're up in exchange doesn't make this over yet, especially after bishop takes h4, allowing, this is a real thing. But it may not be enough, but at the same time, white is definitely fighting. Rook takes g2 and king f3, and then rook takes h2 here from Capablanca. Now, you could not defend this, or you could if you'd like. But why would you just give him the rook back? That's just not a move. It's not a move, so don't do that. So now after king f3, there's rook takes h2, saying at least I'm going to get something for it if you're going to take this bishop. And instead of rook takes e7, which just allows king to g6, or actually king f8 being better because rook takes e6. In this case, we actually chose bishop takes e7 from Janowski, giving ourselves some options here where we can play bishop d6, bishop c5. Maybe we want to try to queen this one. Maybe we can box the king out a little bit. So we took with the bishop here, could give ourselves lots of options instead of a one forced line here. Capablanca says rook h3. Make sure we can do something about this king, and it makes sure he moves, knowing where he's going to go. But he plays king f2. So he just goes back, king f2 here. But we have an exchange, but this is not over yet. Everything's kind of locked up, and the rooks need open files. But these open files here are only very cool. They look very cool. And we could check back and forth, or we can go to the other side of the board where you're weak at. Rook takes b2 being a real thing. Bishop g5 check from Janowski here. Very strong check. But there probably may have been better check here, bishop f6, but he plays bishop to g5 check. And then king to g6, we're stepping right into the little cubby hole, doing our thing here. And after king g6, there's rook to e7, hitting e6 here, saying, hey, look, I'm fighting. I am fighting for my life here. And if you notice look how Capablanca put all of his pieces on the light squares, because there's a dark square bishop. This is some of the most phenomenal way to play against a bishop, especially if you don't have a bishop of the same color here. Everything he has is on the light squares. So this dark square bishop couldn't find a great discovery check at all, just because everything's on the light squares. Nothing to it for it to attack. Almost playing down a piece here. After rook to e7, there's rook takes b2, which is pretty simple. If you go to the back rank, I mean, that just smells like mate. It just really smells like checkmate if you put your king on the back rank. So he says, king f3, keep the king active, right? But then that smells like checkmate as well. After rook a8, oh my goodness. Rook a8, how do you stop this check? What do you do? What do you do? I'm going to let you answer that one. A lot of you probably just said resign. Absolutely. Of course. But rook takes e6, we're going to play on just a little bit more. Rook takes e6 check, and then king h7 stepping out of the way. And right here, he resigned. He resigned. There's nothing you can do about it. Actually, from the engine, the best line is rook to e7, king g8, and then rook e8 check. Come on now, guys. Rook e8 check. You know that. You know it's bad when the engine says this is your best move. And then coming back around here, you win 20 different ways in this position. But that was an awesome one. Just finding rook takes b2 and then rook to a8 very subtly, ending the game. And that was number 3, guys. Now let's move on to endgame number 4. And here we are with endgame number 4. Now this one is more of a middle game to end game transition here, but watch how Capablanca takes on Emanuel Lasker here in 1921 just to finish this game off. Let's see what happens. Actually, after queen to d6 here being the last move from Lasker, is queen to e4, centralizing the queen, threatening things like queen to b7, keeping pressure on here as well on the e6 pawn. Strong move. And then rook to a4 here, very strong from Lasker, attacking the bishop. And if the bishop moves, we do rook takes d4. So best defense being offense, we actually try queen to b7 here. And if queen to e7 actually runs into queen c6, attacking the rook, and e6 at the same time, that could definitely be some danger there. So after queen to b7, there's king to g6, just stepping out of the way, and have a nice day. But won't be so nice with your king on g6, especially with the king being here on g1, and our king's pretty safe. Now queen to c8 here, we still have to deal with this problem of the bishop hanging. and also the d4 pawn hanging, but it's actually not hanging anymore due to things like queen to e8 check being very, very strong if queen takes d4. So queen to b4 here, defending the rook, still hitting the bishop, still hitting the pawn, and hitting e1. What a move here. So, of course, Capablanca finds the easy move, rook to c1, defending the bishop. After rook to c1, there's queen to e7 backing up, stopping queen e8 from happening. And, of course, we have to do what we have to do here. So bishop d3 check, very strong. Hitting g6, allowing the rook to come to c7, and here it goes. King to h6 steps out of the way because king g7 runs immediately into rook c7. Rook c7 anyway from Capablanca here. And after queen or rook a1 check first, king g2, and then queen to d6. In this position, white to move, guys. What are you going to play? What are you going to play here? Maybe we should try to trade queens. Maybe queen b7, maybe something like that. What would you do? Here it is. This is what Capablanca chose. Capablanca says, all right, Lasker, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to take my queen, and I'm going to take on f8 because I'm that great. Look at that. That is beautiful here. Oh, my goodness. And that's a resign moment, which, of course, Emmanuel Lasker resigned here. After queen takes f8, rook takes h7 is mate and we great. Wow. It was all about that king safety, and it was very, very risky and very, very shaky for black here, as Capablanca demonstrated how you should do it there. And that is number 4, guys. Now let's get into the final one, which is number 5. And here we are with the final endgame here, guys. The final endgame here, and this is Henry Ernest Atkins versus Capablanca in 1922. Last move being rook b2 check, so we have to move the king, and king goes to e3. Black is trying to queen this pawn as quickly as possible. If we look at the count here, it's 3 pawns on this side, 3 pawns over here, and versus this 1 extra pawn that we're going to try to queen as quickly as possible. Now, we're actually going to snap one, says Kappa here. We're going to take on g2 here, and then Henry chooses bishop to f2. We have to try to stop the connection you got going on here. But there's a very strong move here, guys. Instead of maybe like 95 or trying to push, or even king g5, which are simple moves to make, pretty good. We actually have a very offensive move that's actually defense at the same time. Let's actually see if we can find it. Black to move. What would you play here? Here it is, guys. Knight to b4 for the score. If rook takes a3, knight c2, and what do? You just resign there. That will answer that for you. Knight to b4, rook takes. Let's put that on the board. Ouch. GG. So knight to b4, very strong move here. And after knight to b4, also threatening things like knight d3 in certain cases. But after knight b4, there's king to e2 stepping back. We eventually want to maybe move our king and play bishop e1, depending on what he does, or try to block the connection. This is very scary for us. But Capablanca is not scared at all because we're winning. A2, now we're defending the pawn with the knight, and we can also walk our king around this way and try to queen. This is hopeless here for the white pieces. After A2, there's rook to A3. And actually right here, guys, knight to B4, I'm actually just showing you what happened afterwards. Knight to B4, Henry resigned right here. The game is over. He just resigned. He's like, I don't want any more. This is over. But let's push on. Let's see why he resigned. Well, king e2 is one of the best moves to make here, trying to find something to do and stick around. And maybe if the rook is dislodged, then we can play bishop e1 or bishop d4. Now, after king e2, we do have a2 once again, defending the pawn, and rook a3. Rook a3 is very nice. Just trying to do whatever we can, but you can't really move this rook off of this file. You want to keep it here. So rook to h2, we're trying to go rook h1. And again, this is why this king placement is nice, because bishop e1 is going to block the queen from happening. Now h4 is on the board, stopping you from taking anything. And then king to c4, going to walk the king in just a little bit. Rook to a8, going back to the back rank. I have to stay here. I have to stay on this file, and is not doing it with a smile because this game is over already. Now, beautiful move here, guys. King b3 being probably the most logical, the most human-like is king b3. But what would you do in this position to finish this off? This is what could have happened in the end game. It was resigned at knight b4. Game was over after knight to b4, but this is a potential continuation. Now, after rook a8, what's the move? Here it is, guys. Knight d3. That's for me. GG. Rook takes f2. And if you take on a2, same idea as before. Look how cool that is, that you could just do everything and push it up a file and be able to still have the same idea here. But actually, let's say we could do some checks here. Senseless checks, which they don't do anything. Rook check. And then if you check me again, I'm going to go king b7, stopping king a8 from happening, or rook a8. And then after rook to a8, then of course it's the same thing here. We do have the check. But also rook takes f2 is the thing. Knight takes f2 is just best. It's just best. Take here. And of course, rook takes is decisive. You just move and check and take the rook here. Now, that's the end, guys. That was the top 5 end games from Jose Raúl Capablanca. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, guys. And we will see you on the next video.